Welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Rachel Tapman, and my channel is for anybody who cares about language, technology, and other people. And today I have a little bit of a special treat for you. So I'm here with Yasin, who is a researcher at Hugging Face. And if you tune into the coffee chats regularly, you probably would have heard me talking about Bloom, which is a model that Hugging Face just released. And I thought that y'all did some really interesting work and thought around releasing these models responsibly. I think it would be probably good to start off the conversation just for you to introduce yourself. So what's your background like? What's your role at Hugging Face like? Anything else you think is relevant?
Yeah, of course. So I've been a researcher at Hugging Face for, I think it's been 2.5 years now. It's been a minute. So my background before that was mostly on language modeling, conditional language modeling. I did my PhD on language modeling pre-transformers and medical application of machine learning, which was a big interest of my advisor. Then after that, I did a postdoc at Facebook AI Research, where I was more working on conditional language modeling, long-form question answering, giving paragraph length answer to questions as opposed to just snippets, unsupervised summarization. Then moved to Hugging Face in March 2020, literally 3 days before everybody went off for the pandemic. So I got to meet the team for 3 days. I was first working on that same kind of modeling work for long-form QA, did a follow-up of that. And then I started more and more working on the data side of things, in part because a lot of my work before that had involved making data sets, in part because a lot of the issues, biases, a lot of what we want to be fixing in our field happens at the data side. I think my first really big project in that space was helping organize a hackathon when we were starting our datasets library, which was a really cool experience where we really targeted coverage, language coverage. So trying to get the new library started with not just English. I think it was about 200 participants from around the world adding datasets to the library. And then 3 months after that, there was this opportunity to start the BigScience project. And I can tell a lot more about that. I can say a lot more about that, but it was great to have that opportunity to expand the collaborative approach of doing research together and making cool things together.
Definitely. Thinking back, I'm not sure if you mentioned it, but just for people who aren't familiar, QA is question answering. I think you did actually. And something that jumped out to me is I think, currently language modeling is a very widely discussed area of NLP, but sort of before Transformers, I would say it was a little bit less glamorous, perhaps.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what your experience of that transition has been as a researcher who worked in that particular task?
Right. So the idea of using language modeling pre-training to get useful representation had been around for a while, but hadn't really started working or hadn't had this scale to start working until 2017-18, right? I started my PhD in 2012, and shortly after that, Word2Vec became widely popular.
Yeah.
Which is maybe a simpler or an earlier iteration of that idea. There was this quote going around, "You shall know the meaning of a word by the company it takes."
Yeah.
So going from this distributional information you have on where a word shows up in natural language, you'll get some useful information about what it means. And then we get the step up to we're not just going at a word in general, but a word in its context. So first Elmo and BERT, and it's been innovation after innovation, scale evolution after scale evolution since then to support, ideally to help support everything that we're already doing, but the language modeling aspect has taken a life of its own with stuff like prompting and trying to get the language models to do things directly.
Yeah, which I think brings us to the next sort of big point, which is, if a language model is part of an NLP pipeline, presumably the person who is using it is, an NLP engineer or someone who has background in it, and has a lot of education around it, and hopefully understands, the benefits and drawbacks of the system. But with language models being interacted with, I would say predominantly necessarily, but commonly using this prompt engineering, where all you really need to know is, some tips and tricks about how to like format things and like little. It's really interesting the way that sort of the social knowledge about how to use language models to do things has percolated around, with people being like, oh yeah, I tried this and it worked really well, and then everyone starts using that particular formatting for like question answering stuff. But because it requires a lot less, engineering and specialized knowledge, it opens up these models to a whole new group of users. And on the one side, that's great, right? We want people to be able to use language technology. We want people to be able to build things that, make their lives better. But on the other side, there is that, I wouldn't say it's gatekeeping, but there is that worry that people are over applying these models, or, maybe perhaps misunderstanding their utility, and over applying them. And then there's the sort of the third thing, which is, there's of course like people who are well-meaning, and are sort of, I wouldn't necessarily say making mistakes, but maybe not making the most, well thought out decisions. And then there's people who are straight up using these models for harmful ends. And I think that's something that y'all thought a lot about with Bloom. And do you want to talk about your sort of thought process there, and then some of the mitigation efforts you took to try and, reduce the issues, either of people who are like well-meaning and like do something unintentionally harmful, or people who are straight up trying to use these models to do harmful tasks?
Yeah. Okay, so we're covering a lot of ground there. I'm going to start from the end of what you mentioned, but like feel free to bring me back to any of the other points. So the main answer is that there is no single answer, right? When thinking about the impact of technology, we really want to take as much of a multi-pronged approach as we can. So there's going to be some things we do at the project design to make things on balance less harmful, and then something at the dataset selection, and then something at the model training, and then some things when we're releasing the model. Which means that like describing what we did to make the model have a better impact is never very short.
Yeah.
At a high level, project design, the big thing was people, including people in all of the decisions, including people who facilitating participation for people who did not necessarily have the like technical background that is most favored to usually participate in those efforts. At the dataset selection, we made this big choice of favoring and prioritizing a constructive approach for the dataset, which is selecting sources and knowing what we're putting into the datasets, rather than trying to remove what we don't want in the dataset. Which is less often like assumption of universality. And I think we should like go back to that when we talk about how the model performs now. Like we have lots of things that we want the model to have learned from, and then it's learned from that, but we're not expecting that it's doing much greater than anything else. Okay, keeping on topic. Some things that we did at training. I think one thing I would point out, for example, is we did some private information reduction basically just before tokenization for crawl data, because we did end up using some crawl data. So that's like a small thing that makes the model a little less likely to spit out private information. And then we released the model under, so a model who we thought would hopefully, to begin with, be less harmful than if we hadn't done all of that. We're also releasing it under that intentional responsible AI license, which says that if you're using it following the license, which is like a whole other question about enforcement, you're not going to be using it in two categories of situations: ones that are intentionally harmful, like malicious uses, and the other one are things where there's a high likelihood of things going wrong. That's the overarching arc. I don't know which one you would like to focus on first.
Yeah, it's. I think people who have been, interacting with epidemiologists recently have probably heard about the Swiss cheese approach, which is the idea that if you, put down one slice of Swiss cheese over something, Swiss cheese has holes in it, you can see through the Swiss cheese, but if you put down a bunch of slices of Swiss cheese and the holes don't align, you can't see the thing that's on the other end. And so that same sort of layering different approaches of mitigation to, improve the final outcome, I think is really a good approach and just sort of generally useful in engineering. So let's start from, let's go through the pipeline. So constructed data, right? So this is in contrast to I wouldn't say like the overarching ethos of the field, but a very common practice of I'm going to find all the data I possibly can. I'm just going to shove it in a garbage bag. I don't care, really where it came from. More is better. And this is sort of in opposition to your approach. So do you want to talk about it a little bit more?
Yes. So I think we start by giving credit to the Illustrator AI folks because with fewer people than we had, they released that pilot data set, which had some of the same idea that we're going to choose specific sources and add them together to make like web scale data sets. So it wasn't just the web. So it was really useful to have seen that happen and to have seen that lead to models that were performing better to build on top of that. Where we pushed the envelope a little bit more, or like we really wanted to go a little further, was in one, the language coverage, two, who was making the choices and who was making the selections. And those two things are tied together, right? Like we, the group that was, or like we at the core Hugging Face team, or we like had some idea of how to select sources that were relevant to our own context, but we didn't necessarily know what would have been good sources of language data for Vietnamese or good sources of language data for any of the Indic languages we wanted to include. So we want people who have both language and a cultural competency to be able to make those choices. So then making a data set becomes more like less a technical and more a social endeavor, right? It's how do we make it so that first we have reached out and we have given that opportunity to other people, number one. Number two, how do we make it so that it's something that's in their benefit, not just in ours? Because we can't really go to people and say, hey, we have this cool project, please do some work for us. So we really wanted to see, so here we have this cool project, we think it's going to be really cool for you. How about we join forces? By the way, like full disclosure, we're definitely going to use that in that large language model. Is that something you're cool with?
Is that how you ended up with the specific selection of languages you did? Because just sort of looking at them as a linguist, I was like, there's not a whole lot that ties these languages together. So it came more from the social aspect of who was interested?
Yeah. Yes, in part. We did have a drive. So the other thing is like, we're spending 3 million in compute. We want to make sure that as many people as possible find this model relevant. So it means like we're going to look extra hard for people who speak some of the most spoken languages in the world. So we started with that list of like target languages where we're really, really going to take the time to find people who can like give some insights on Arabic, give some insights on Spanish, give some insights on, and that started with the like Wikipedia list of languages with the most fluent speakers, which like, again, depending on where you look, how you consider fluent speakers, where you look at L1 or L2 speakers, the list changes a lot. But we started somewhere. And then on top of that, we said, if you have a language that you're interested in working on, if you can commit to doing some work, which we're going to tell you is actually going to be a lot of selecting sources and then making choices about proposal into the model. And between those two things, we ended up with those very widely spoken languages and a few other languages that maybe have fewer speakers, but people were really interested in doing the data work about on. And that's how the final list came about.
And it is, I'd say, a really good selection of languages. And for some of those languages, I think this is the first model of this size trained using text from that language and not sort of like multilingually translated into it. I don't know if you've used any of the multilingual BERT stuff at all, but it's...
No, I haven't, but I was one of the many people working on the data quality at a glance audit paper. So looking at like all of the language identification misses and languages that aren't actually the languages we thought they were. So yeah, we didn't want to do that.
Yeah, language data is rich and powerful, and it's hard and complex. So yeah, I'm sure you know that better than most people, for sure. And so then moving...
It's been interesting journey.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, okay, I was just gonna say, so moving forward from, you have this data, and instead of like wide scraping and trying to like mitigate and exclude what you didn't want, you had a very intentional data curation process, which is great for engineers using this, because they, you know, can look up and be like, hey, I'm working in X domain. Was that included in the training data? Yes, the model's probably a good choice. No, okay, you need to do like quite a bit of fine tuning to get there. And then you said you did some sort of like data reduction and redaction before the tokenization stage. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that process as well?
Yeah. So one thing I say is that constructive approach did not get us all the way there, right? It's like we did a lot of work there. We were very proud of getting to like about 60% of the estimated data needs for the compute that we had. And then there were some reasons for still using crawl data. That was like one of the things that I thought was really exciting about this project is that we took a value pluralist approach where we listed some of the values that we were interested in, got insight from different participants about how they prioritize and how they saw those values. And when those values came in conflict with each other or looked like they were coming in conflict with each other, like took the time to really confront what they were, see what were the actual inherent incompatibilities and where we could work towards doing something. Choosing crawl data was an example of that, because we wanted to release a model that was comparable to what had been done before. Those had been trained on crawl data, and we wanted to make something where, like, once we release it and we analyze it and we look at the performance, people can say, hey, you just didn't use enough data, so like the whole thing is void. And then doing that value pluralist approach is like, okay, so we do have to use crawl data, even if we think it's not ideal, but what are we going to do about that? Because we know there are like capital I issues with crawl data. And we're looking at that. So we're looking at biases. We're looking at things that's not actually text. We're looking at missed language identification, and we're looking at privacy issues. And we try to address, work to address each of those independently. Some of the things is that we only use crawl data for languages where we were confident in the language identification. We had independent pre-processing pipelines per language, where we always had native language speakers making the choices of which filters to apply, what hyperparameters to use. And we did some private information reduction for things that we could identify with high precision. Where the idea was private information detection is very hard and we don't have good systems for it. But there are some kinds of private information that we can detect, and then there's no excuses not to remove them.
Yeah, very easy to get rid of credit card numbers, just as a for instance.
Right, or emails, or GitHub IDs. Like there's an ad in there, we remove that.
Definitely. Can you regex it? Then you probably should.
Yes, absolutely.
Another thing that you mentioned that I think is often something that people actually do, but also sort of rarely something that people admit to, is fitting to compute budget, right? So you had, you mentioned you had $3 million of compute. You wanted to use all of that because, of course, we sort of generally as a field know that, particularly for these very large models, the longer they bake, the better they tend to do. And that was sort of your ceiling, and so making sure that you could fit everything that you needed to within that ceiling to get the best model you possibly could. We might say the best bang for your buck in the US. I think that's a US expression. is I think, yeah, those of us who have worked in industry are very familiar with that that workflow and that pipeline. But it's not often something that gets discussed, particularly in the papers that come out of these, super big research labs that are just dripping in money and compute and like, throwing TPUs and GPUs around like poker chips.
Yeah, and like that was the product of a lot of discussion. What was going to be the size of the model, what was going to be the compute time, and how we estimated how much data we wanted. So I think this is like, I've heard Zirac Talat say that call for decentering technical perspectives and like technical values when we're making those choices. But decentering means that, I mean, in my opinion, means not putting them above other concerns. We still have technical constraints, so we're trying to see how we fit them. How that works in this question is we wanted to make sure that we had a couple of constraints. First, comparable to previous work, which informed the number of parameters we wanted for the model. Second, a fair effort at having good performance downstream without throwing any other concerns out of the door, but so that we have valid like scientific process in how we analyze the things, especially if that was going to be the only open model that people could experiment with. And what that ended up looking like was deciding to do a conservative estimation of the data size needed, because conservative because we knew that like data was going to be the bottleneck, so that we wouldn't want to like call for just adding more crawl data because we had overestimated how much data we needed. But still using as much as we knew at the time about scaling laws to try to make sure that we're in the neighborhood of how much data we needed.
I think it's a great point that data was your bottleneck, because I think that's very often the case, particularly for domain-specific tasks in industry. And that's not always necessarily obvious to people who are not working in the industry, right? I think there's a lot of discussion about compute being the bottleneck, and sometimes it is, but more often it's like, I don't have the data that I need to collect it, and it's expensive, it's hard, it takes so much time. Yeah, so I think that's
it takes lots of people is the thing.
Yes.
Like that's really the thing that we're not doing right now is the resources that we're using on compute, we can use on organization, and we can use on like creating places where people meet. And BigScience is, I think, a cool example of that. It's not the only one. And we had a lot of support, and we were able to do that because other people have done things like that before us, right? Like Masakane, Machine Learning Collective, Illustrator, so many other great organizations.
Definitely. And I think it's a great point that, sometimes we, as a field, don't focus enough on the people. I think, was it the Google Emotions data set that I want to say Surge AI recently released a blog post. They'd gone through and relabeled a sample of the data set and had found that about a third of the labels were wrong because the labelers didn't share cultural context with the people who'd produced the language data in the first place. Yeah, people are not interchangeable.
Yeah.
All right, so we've talked about the data collection and the sort of discussion that went into there. You mentioned value-sensitive design. So for those of you who are not familiar, Batya Friedman's work is a really good jumping-off point there to learn a little bit more. Also, I think she gave a keynote at NACL as well, so that recording might be available somewhere. I'm not 100% sure. I'll dig it up if it is. We also talked about sort of the remediation and removal of PII as much as possible during the training process, and then the training process itself, and some of the discussion there, and deciding how to allocate time and budget, because nobody has infinite time and infinite money. And I think the other thing that's really interesting about this project that really caught my eye was the new license, right? The Responsible AI license. I think that's what it all stands for. I'm pretty sure. So do you want to talk a little bit about it? And I'd love if we could dive into, the thought process behind it. And then the other big question, which I think is unanswered right now, which is enforcement. What's that gonna look like? And what I'm not asking you to answer these questions in
Yeah.
a legal advice capacity, but if you were to put on your, Nostradamus hat and look into the future, what do you think you could see? So just starting off with, what was the process like? What were you thinking about? How did you come up with the idea to create a new license, and then what was the process of creating that license like?
Cool. So I'm going to preface that by saying that like I am talking about my understanding of the process. RAID licenses in general are a multi-year effort that has been led by a Danish contractor who's a researcher at IBM. And we were very lucky that he decided to join BigScience and lend his expertise on that topic. And then him and Carlos, who's Carlos Munoz Ferrandis, took the lead together on adapting RAID licenses to the Bloom use case. So there's been a lot of previous work. I think one of the really interesting things about RAID licenses is that even before they came to BigScience, there had been iterative processes of getting feedback on how they can work or not. And then it was really useful to be at that conjuncture of people releasing a model with the need to have a responsible approach that balances social concerns and responsibility and openness, and those like previous years of work on RAID. Within BigScience, we had quite a lot of internal conversation about what the purpose of the model was. At a high level, we had decided that the driving goal was openness, reproducibility, and inclusion, which means that people should be able to experiment with the model once it's released without too many distinctions of affiliation, location, whatever, and without too many hurdles. One of the things we considered early on was releasing the model under a non-commercial license, which has been done. And it's kind of, that's one of the things, right? Like non-commercial licenses are a Western academic tradition. I'm like being a little snarky here, but we found a couple of issues with that. Number one is that like commercial uses of a model introduce their own incentives that are sometimes incompatible with doing things responsibly and thoughtfully. And we're recognizing that, and that's like kind of the reason why we kind of go with non-commercial as a first idea. But on the other hand, there are a couple of things. One, non-commercial is extremely difficult to define whenever you try to go into the like specific of what it means. Number two, use cases can be very harmful without being commercial. Like, you can use a model for surveillance without selling any produces to anyone, right? And number three, a lot of the people we invited to participate in that project are not in traditional academic structures. They're either like they have their day job and they're volunteering for a local machine learning organization, or they are like using those in their own projects that they might be selling some component for, and that's how they are able to do research and to bring their own perspectives. Some of the people, for example, like the VietAI folks did an amazing job of creating data themselves and making it available for us to use in this project, not necessarily to release. It's kind of fair that they should be able to like use the output of that work kind of adds to some extent as they see fit. To some extent, we're still having like those responsible use clauses. So that first idea of non-commercial was first introducing hurdles that were not really compatible with the ideals of inclusion, and also not that efficient at preventing things that we were really afraid about, like being consequences of those models. So that's how we went to from non-commercial to use case restrictions. And that's something that is really new that we're not still not used to implementing or thinking about. In particular, because a lot of us who work on those systems are very influenced by open source culture, software open source culture. But that's the thing, right? Software and machine learning artifacts are related. There's a lot of us working on both of them, but they're not the same beast. And so they don't need the same exact kind of openness. Right. So that's how we got to there. I don't know if you want to like ask follow-up questions about any of the that journey or the specifics of what we did.
Yeah, that's something that I've personally been thinking a lot about as someone who's worked in open source quite a bit. is there's a big difference between the code used to train the model and the model itself, right? And the difference is that for language models specifically, some of the stakeholders are in no way involved in the process, and they're particularly. I like the idea to think the idea of thinking about people whose language data is used in these models as data donors, but they don't have a donor relationship, right? It's more like data Shanghaiers. Shanghaiing, just for reference for those of you who may not be familiar, was the process of conscripting people into merchant vessels. So basically, you'd kidnap people and take them on your boat, and then when you're out at sea and they woke up, you're like, we're on our way to another country, and you have to work or we won't feed you. And it's not quite exactly the same as what we're doing with people's data, but they don't get a choice in whether or not the model is open source that's using their data. And, there's been a lot of work, particularly with these large language models, on, extracting data from them and personal data from them. So yeah, it's something I've been thinking a lot about myself, and how, we can't train models without language data, right? And it also doesn't make sense for us to only train, right? Every person who worked on the model, you get all the papers you've ever written and you shove those together, and that's the only thing you use to train the model, right? You can't train something on just your language data and have it be broadly useful. So how do we balance being respectful of individuals whose data we're using, with this sort of ethos of openness and availability? And ACL and NLP research in particular has, a strong academic tradition of openness, right? So the ACL proceedings since, the 60s are all available for free online. And that is not true, I would say, most academic disciplines. Most academic disciplines have a much more closed, a much more exclusionary publishing practice, which, again, it's that same thing of you open source the model, it's available, a lot more people can use it, and that has that benefit and that has drawbacks. And yeah, I think licensing is a really interesting way to try and address those drawbacks and say, hey, you can't legally do X with this model, right? So I think some of the particular things that the Rail license disallows are surveillance, detecting or attempting to diagnose diseases in people without their consent. Those are just two that I remember off the top of my head right now. So I think the open question that a lot of people are thinking about and talking a lot about is, do they work? What are we going to do if somebody is like, I've built, disloyalty detector 3000 that scrapes tweets and tells, the US government who's a traitor, which is, I would say, a surveillance use case. What are we going to do about it? And how does that process work? Question mark.
That is a great question. One of the things that I will say to that is that, from my own perspective, having grown up in France and then moved to the US, the difference in the judicial traditions really comes to shine there. Between okay, again, I am not an expert, but
put you on this call as a lawyer. This is not legal
as
advice.
a layperson, was that when something is wrong in France, you deposit a complaint to the authorities. Whereas when something goes wrong in the US, you sue the offending party. There's kind of a meaningful difference here, right? In the latter thing, you're but who's going to do the suing, and do they have the resources to do it and to follow it through? But it's not necessarily the only way to, in my opinion, think about legal processes and legal tools. Still, a lot of what we're doing in the US context, so we still need to address that. So there are a couple of things we've been thinking about in that direction. The first one is, it's important to make progress before we have all of the answers, right? The license as itself is a tool to spread norms and to spread understanding of what should and should not be done, and to have conversations about that. Number two is that one of the enforcement, quote unquote, enforcement mechanisms that we have that doesn't go through the legal system is reputation loss. Many of the actors who are going to be using the systems have some stake in their own reputation, and doing something that is blatantly illegal, violating a license, is going to be an issue whether or not someone is there to sue them. And the last thing is we are also working on the governance structure for the model, and this is going to be continuing past the BigScience training. And anyone who is interested in contributing to that should reach out and join the BigScience continuation.
And what would be the best way for them to do that? Plug, plug, plug.
The BigScience form is still open. So go there, say that you're interested in model governance, and you will be routed to the Slack in the right places.
And I'll link that in the video description. And I'm gonna write it down so I actually link it in the video description. So yeah, and I think the reputation loss and sort of setting social norms is a great point, and certainly something that I think can be pretty effective, right? So even, I don't know, I think a lot about I think a lot about politics and laws and legislatures.
Hugging Face is the main headquarters is in New York, but we're really between the two, between France and the US. The model was trained using a French public grant. And I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with those grant applications, but because it's in France, there was a required section on data management plan and how we were going to at least think about being GDPR compliant.
Yeah, and maybe in the US we'll get privacy protection regulations, but right now, unless you live in California, we kind of don't. So yeah, we've talked about a lot of things today. We covered, data collection and how that, can shape model outputs, sort of how you decided to include what languages, so biasing towards languages that have more speakers, which I think is, if you're focused on inclusion, that's a great way to include as many people as possible. Value-sensitive design from people in those communities, really focusing on native language annotators and input from people who are in the language communities whose language is being used in the model, which is fantastic and something that I think doesn't get done often enough, particularly outside of a US, North America, European context. And we talked about, steps taken before training, and the decision to include some scraped data and, where that came from. And also we talked quite a bit about this sort of the general ethos of the BigScience project and this, the challenges of balancing openness and that sort of research value that a lot of researchers, particularly in NLP, tend to have with, mitigating harm and, trying not to make society worse. I think that's probably a fair description of the project. And if at all possible, better. That would be great. And we also talked about this Rail license and why you decided to release the model under that and not a non-commercial use, which I think is a really interesting and influential decision. And I'm interested to see how it goes in the future. A little bit about governance and the idea that, there's laws, but there's also social pressure, right? So particularly in research. If you have a reputation as a researcher who cannot be trusted cannot be trusted, let me just put it that way, it can be very difficult to find additional jobs in research, certainly at the sort of places that I would like to work at.
But that's the thing, right?
Yeah. So just to wrap up, I always like to end on a positive note, which I think this whole discussion has been more or less positive, but we've also definitely covered, some of the, I think there's definitely an underlying current that a lot of these decisions are made to mitigate people doing bad things, whether or not they intend to do those bad things. And I deeply believe in the power of language technology, and I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't. So one thing I always like to ask people is, what is your favorite piece of language technology? What's something that you use all the time and you're like, oh, this one's good. I really like this.
You know what? I should have an answer for that. Because I started working on long-form question answering during my postdoc because I think it's really cool. You ask a question and you get, if you're doing it right, an answer that gives you a couple of relevant points and pointers to where the information was found. And it's if you're passionate about the world and how things work and where to find information that you don't really have access to, that's amazing. And in many ways, like Google in its earlier days was a really, really cool thing. And then like we're back to commercial incentives, and that's how that changes the purposes of technology. But making information available at scale, especially information that's out of your immediate sphere, is something that we can do so much with language technology, and especially with those larger models where they can use as those indexes that actually get a lot of information, access a lot of information. But then we do have to make sure that they're trained with that range of information and for that purpose.
Yeah, question answering. When it works, it works. When it doesn't, it can be very, very dangerous, unfortunately. But yeah, when it works, it's great. And also, I don't know, I think anyone who's done a research degree is probably very aware that sometimes genuinely the best and easiest way to find something out is to find somebody who knows something about it and then ask them. And to have that really be a more widely available thing is very powerful.
And not just in English.
And not just in English. Ah, man. Get that as a tattoo. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Yasin. I really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you for tuning in and listening and watching. And I hope that you found this discussion, helpful and interesting, and it guides your own thinking and work in language technology. Thanks so much for joining, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that.